Welcome back to another episode of Discovering Disruptions in Tech. I'm your host, Howard Holton, and this week I'm here with Raj from ColorTokens. Hey, Raj, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, Howard. How are you?
I'm doing great. Gartner is next week. I'm about to go to a conference right next to the mouse, and so I get to spend my evenings visiting Mickey Mouse. So I'm really looking forward to it. So before we kind of kicked off this call, we had a brief chat, and I think we both share. I think we both share some excitement around kind of networking and micro-segmentation, right? As we kind of look at the current environment, what we see is there's a real focus around mitigating the blast radius, right? Minimizing the blast radius. So we no longer live in a world where attacks aren't going to happen to our organization. We no longer live in a world where it's not if, it's when. We actually live in a world where we know it's going to happen. It may have already happened. How bad will it be?
Absolutely.
Right. So talk to me about microsegmentation and kind of the history there.
Sure. See, if you look at the industry as a whole, if you like 20 years, 25 years, I think we had a phenomenal run on the compute side. We really optimized compute, and from bare metal boxes to virtualization constructs, then microservices, container-based constructs came in, cloud and PaaS services came in. The optimization of compute was done phenomenally well. The same, I would say, is predominantly done on the storage side. We have phenomenal innovation actually happening on the storage. But if you look at networks, they're still in those 25, 30-year-old constructs are still there. And the worst part is the security is like 40 years back.
So it assumes the security exists to begin with, right?
Exactly. And the construct of internet was pretty much open to all. And now we are putting patches after patches in terms of trying to secure. A new attack vector comes in, you see a new startup bubbling up saying that, I actually have a solution for it. And little do we realize what are the operational, pain to actually manage those particular solutions. With micro-segmentation, when we looked at it, we have to understand that today, 85% of the traffic is inside traffic. East-west, machines-to-machines communications, user-to-systems communications. That's where it is. And when you look at firewalls, they do a fundamentally good job in terms of northbound traffic, but it's only 15%. So if there is one compromise, some ignorant user clicking on the system, clicking on an email, compromise happens, they are connected over VPN, boom, you have actually an attack inside. Then what do you do? 80-90% of systems are still flat networks. That's just a hard reality. People might not want to believe it, but that it is. Now, there is a network segmentation construct done, but those are lacking complete visibility. You just don't know who is talking to whom. You're putting policies through VPN.
Well, and most of the segmentation that's done is not for security. Most of the segmentation that's done is restricting broadcast domains. Like it's
absolutely right.
Fundamentally solving networking problems, not solving security problems.
Not solving security problems. Right? You're so right about that.
And so we're still back at the old like fort moat wall kind of situation where once you're in the walls,
you have a front door and that's about it. And that's your security. Trust and untrusted environment. Trust every employee, every system, every communication going on. But that just can't last long. And we were having a conversation before that. It's just a function of when. The attack is a function of when, not if. And at that point in time, you need a protective mechanism, a proactive mechanism of reducing your blast radius. So micro-segmentation is a technology. When we started going into the details around it, we said, okay, let's actually look at a micro-segmentation technology and put controls very close to the node. And this could be the server. This could be any system. So foundationally, we started with that construct. But the complications started increasing. The complication is how many policies will you put on that particular system? Inbound, outbound traffic. Then the operational mess comes in, because how many policies will you apply? Managing firewall is a pain. How would you manage micro-segmentation on each and every node? Because getting inside outside traffic becomes extremely important. It must be done, but how do you operationally govern it? So micro-segmentation technology enables you to completely reduce the blast radius. You can go to the lowest node, apply policies, but the most interesting element of it is how do you operationally manage it at scale? Because if it takes you for 1,000 servers, it takes you to reduce that blast radius, and it takes you 1 year to do it. Think about it. If you have 40,000 servers, lifetime goes into it. So
well, and let's be clear, right? If it takes you a year to implement it on 1,000 servers, you also have a year worth of changes that are not implemented.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And where micro-segmentation in the last 4 or 5 year journey has happened, now we are seeing that micro-segmentation at scale implemented, where automation is building, and with Gen AI, you're able to understand the traffic pattern and apply at scale. So it must be done. And foundationally, if you look at security, today we are not thinking secure by design constructs. If you look at entire compute, private data centers, public data centers, or public cloud environments, the compute needs to be segregated, and it should be by design. Reason being that anytime if a compromise happens, today in cloud, you don't have actually control on pipes. All they give you is security groups. What do you do at that point in time? So you need foundational constructs of micro-segmentation. And most important of this is, if you look at segmentation from operating systems, like bare metal or virtual machines, you need to put controls on operating system. But what happens to container technologies? You can't do for every single container. I mean, the lifetime of a container is like few minutes, few hours, so on and so forth. How do you do that? So you need some kind of a sidecaring technology, a containerized Kubernetes platform. Then how do you actually implement that on a cloud service like a Lambdas of this world, or
Sure.
S3 buckets? Completely different technology, and take it all the way up to OT. So you have agent-based technology, you have agentless technology, you have sidecaring technology, and then you have API-based technologies. That's why it gets interesting. So micro-segmentation is a foundational layer for implementing it, but how you implement also is a very interesting thing. And any organization that is actually implementing it across all of this, agent-based, which is putting agents on operating systems, agentless can be multiple ways, gateway systems. And think about it, we are interacting with customers, they say, servers, secure my applications. We do that. Fantastic. But they're like a hospital, healthcare.
Sure.
Epic servers, they actually want to secure it because that's a lifeline of any hospital. But then, how do you also isolate your OT traffic and the IT traffic? How do you isolate your patient's records, which could be in MRI, right? And going it all the way into your Epic servers. So isolation of MRIs, radiology departments, and other departments and lab environments becomes extremely critical. Completely different set, nothing to do with proprietary operating systems. They are completely proprietary systems. So you need a completely different technology to actually secure that, which is an OT security. But
That's
then
the challenge with OT security, right?
Enormous challenge.
Even if the MRI runs Windows, which I think it does, we used to sell them at Hitachi. It doesn't matter because you don't have access to that operating system to touch it, to manage it, to change it at all, even 1%.
Some of them are Windows and some of them are not. Some of them are completely closed boxes.
Well, they're all closed boxes, right? Even if they're running an operating system you would recognize, it's still a closed box to you, and the manufacturer is not going to be helpful. And even if they're helpful, they're not going to run the same security tools that you need to run which means you won't have visibility to them. It will not be, security that's not federated, security that's not centralized, security that's not standardized is not in fact security. It's just more crap that's not going to do what you want. And so you
That's
need it to
exactly
be
right.
one
It's absolutely
interface. You need it to be one source of truth for the data, for the information, for the decisions and the insights, or it is still broken, it is still a problem, and it is not security.
And if you touch it, you're out of warranty.
Correct.
So there's no way.
And these are $50 million machines.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
These are not, you're not out of warranty on your Nest thermostat.
You
You're out of
don't.
warranty on a $50 million machine that takes a decade to get an ROI from.
Completely agree, Howard. And this is one element. Then the other element, which is very interesting, is the critical infrastructure vulnerability. Your Siemens, your Honeywells of the systems, all of a sudden vulnerability comes through that, enters into your IT or OT and completely disrupts it. So typically 3 core areas where it is: one is a typical server application segmentation, another's are the ones that you talked about, 50, $100 million, systems, completely closed boxes. Even if they have proprietary or non-proprietary operating system, you still need to segment it because interactions are actually happening. And third one is something that we did not pay attention in the last 5, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever that is. Critical infrastructure, completely software defined, can have a vulnerability, has a vulnerability today, and is directly connected to your IT and OT environments. And this is where today's problem is, that any window that is open, a sliver of it is open, it just becomes a particular area to get to the breach.
For sure. So if I've got 10,000 people in my organization, I probably have 40,000 devices that need to be secured.
Yes.
Right? That's probably a reasonable number of devices. If you think about those, like micro-segmentation isn't new. I want to point that out for the audience just in case, right? Like 10 years ago, I was at VMworld when they were on stage talking about micro-segmentation and NSX and how that was going to eat the world. And it didn't happen. And it didn't happen because creating firewall policies for 40,000 devices is impossible. It's just impossible. Yeah. You cannot create and manage 40,000 firewall policies. And it's not even 40,000, right? Because you don't have simple policies to make this work. You have 40,000 devices that need to be secured over micro-segmentation. You probably have 150,000 policy lines up, 300,000, a million lines of policy lines, right? Like it just goes forever, and there really is there's no good end to it, because the more I know, the more detail I have, the more I can continue to restrict traffic to get it to an ideal state, right? If I started tomorrow with 40,000 devices or 40,000 devices and created 40,000 policies, the next day I'd have to double the number of policies. The day after that, I would probably double the policies again as I start to find more and more and more of the traffic that I thought was okay, was necessary, is in fact not necessary at all traffic, and I can continue to reduce that, right?
Well, I'll give you one instance. We are interacting with a very large hospital, can't name them, and it's the conversation, extremely large hospital chain. It takes them approximately 6 months, 8 people to audit policy after policy, if it makes sense or not, right? And so if on January 1st you made a change, they will be able to completely finish and come back to that particular policy probably in June 1st.
Sure.
That's the amount of time. And it's not one person, it's 8 people. That's the number of policies they have it on the firewall.
For sure.
And think about it, that if they are trying to audit this in such a massive scale, what kind of a pain it is for most of these operations. And to be fair and honest, in this space, micro-segmentation in the last 10 years has been, including the one that you talked about, has been an enormously difficult to implement. That's why it has taken such amount of time, because policy management and change management is hard, is extremely hard. How on earth are you going to actually manage that if just to do your day-to-day work is becoming difficult? That's where one has to really rely on the maximum amount of intelligence that can be built and cover your 80-90% of the work. There might be sliver 5-10% of that personalization that you have to do. That's the only amount of micro-segmentation tooling should allow you to do. Rest, it should be all automated. Management systems, management boards. You're having SCCMs or Hashis of this world, and you're operating it. eh, Those should be completely managed. I mean, we know exactly which port protocol they are operating on. Why can't we actually just apply policy and be done with it? We don't have to keep things open. And that's foundationally why micro-segmentation, in fact, in the zero trust principles, there are three core principles of zero trust. One is identity. Second is access. Third is micro-segmentation, the segmentation. Because it's an hygiene. It's not like, hey, if and when. It's a hygiene. You want to have separations. Think about it that if you're entering into the hotel and there are no locks into the rooms, how would you feel about that? Right? If there is any attack vector, it can just compromise the entire hotel. Your front door is not going to help much, and front door is your firewall. Your each and every room, you need a lock, and that's your micro segmentation, because you want to segment, you want to be comfortable, and even if something happens, you want to isolate. Sometimes you want to isolate floors, and sometimes you want to isolate just one particular room, because if something happens, compromise happens only in that room, nothing else. So that's the foundational element of particular security that we are looking at. The most important and interesting aspect is how do we kind of work with other solutions to provide best in class segmentation solution. Does it make sense, Howard, what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, ultimately, no matter how much I segment, right, it still isn't perfect, because that is the next stage, right? The next stage is, there's this whole area, UEBA, right? User and Entity Behavior Analytics.
Yes.
And effectively, you have access to this machine. I've segmented it so that you can only come in on this port to access this service from your machine. Great. But what I haven't also done, and what I need to be able to do, is also recognize that you work in the Eastern time zone, and you are only allowed from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. your time zone, or whatever the time allotment is, whatever the geo allotment is, right? Whatever the access pattern allotment is. And in order to do that, and do that really correctly, that can't all be reliant on one system. We need those integrations to work. Right?
Yes.
We need to be able to connect to the other systems we have that allow us to paint a picture of what is real, what is false, what should be trusted, and what should not be trusted.
See, Howard, I'll tell you the key principles when we look at core systems. If there are systems and there's a communication path between application, database, message queue systems, and so on and so forth, that's easy. The challenge lies in giving location-based, time-based access, right? Backup needs to happen for such and such time. If a backup is compromised, they might all of a sudden trigger a communication path between your servers, and the backup would be, fetched in, because a lot of the attacks are actually happening on the backup servers, right? And how do you prevent those particular untimely access to these systems? So segmentation at a first level of segmentation is basic hygiene. Separate it, and rather than go with macro segmentation, and then eventually take control of that, and then go towards micro segmentation. That's one. And then apply policies. I call them as a static policies, that exactly these communications need to happen. And then comes the policies which are time bound, which are location bound. Your contractor access, your Siemens systems guy is going to come and wants to do some kind of a maintenance. You don't want to have an unfettered access to that particular system or device. That's just not reasonable, right? His system or her system gets compromised, and your system gets compromised because you have direct access to it. Even if that person might be working in your organization as a contractor, but you want to be careful about that, because this particular person is vulnerable to many other systems, and if those are compromised, and he also has lots of access to these particular systems. So there are nuances that you build over the period of time when you start actually having controls in your environment. But as best practices today, when we enter into as ColorTokens, when we enter into, our recommendation is crawl, walk, run.
Yes.
First, start with foundational hygiene of separating these environments. These foundational elements lead you to understand that which ones are the critical assets, which ones are not. We call them as zones. Like, it's a logical construct that zone 7 are the most important assets. This is where business disruption can happen. This is where critical information is stored. Take care of that first, and let you completely have a mechanism of isolating anytime you see a critical incident happening, and you say, this is possibly can lead to a breach or an attack. Let me actually completely isolate, quarantine my zone 7 so that business disruption does not happen. Business is going on as usual. Let me try to apply forensics on these particular systems and see if it was just an incident or if it was something more than that. Those hygienes are foundational. As in, when you put these foundational principles, then you can move into advanced concepts on micro-segmentation, policies, time-based, location-based, intelligence, dynamic policies, rather than static policies. But today, in most of the organizations, there is no kind of a strategy of implementing segmentation.
For
And
sure.
that's something that is a sad part. Because when you go and they say, no, we are completely secure because we have, endpoint security solution like CrowdStrike or something, and then we have SIEM solution. All of them are after the fact solution. Guys, come on, wake up. Like, all of them are after the fact solution. Activity has happened. Somebody is telling you someone is already inside your, attacker is already inside your environment. Then all you are trying to do is basically defend yourself. Do whatever you can. This is preventive measure. This is protecting yourself. This is hygiene. And if an attack happens, then you're actually trying to make sure that the blast radius is completely small, to the tune of 1 unit or 5 units or 3 units. And you don't want this
manageable number of units, right?
Exactly.
A manageable number of units. Also, there is no such thing as complete security. I don't care what you do. There is no complete security. If there were complete security, we'd see the number of CVEs dropping.
Yes, exactly.
Number of CVEs are climbing. They're not dropping.
They're not dropping.
Right? So there is no complete security. And the thing to think about that I think is the most important when we talk about the value of microsegmentation is I must defend against everything that comes my way.
Yep.
I must. Microsegmentation cuts the number of things that can come your way by 10, 50, 100, 999%.
Exactly.
And the percentage of traffic that can come your way can be cut down to the point where it all of a sudden goes from unmanageable to manageable. It also all of a sudden goes from unreasonable to reasonable.
We have customers where their SIEM information, that the log information, reduced by 90%.
For sure.
Now they are able to really get their arms together and say, okay, I can manage this amount of traffic.
Yeah.
Your cyber attacks that CrowdStrikes or any of the EDR solutions, why put so much of load on them? Keep everything open and hope, like, come on, attack me, and then we'll see, because I have an EDR solution. EDR solution will have a tremendous amount of load. And why do you do that? So it doesn't make any sense, to your point, that at the end, all of these, you have to analyze traffic, you have to analyze events, you have to do forensics, and then figure out this incident is a situation, is it a breach or a crisis, whatever that is. You don't want to get into that situation because you've already quarantined certain environments, you've isolated certain environments. Why do you give somebody who's not the right user unfettered access? This doesn't make sense.
So we've talked through kind of the history of microsegmentation, the history of networking, how networking has moved from a series of pipes and tubes that move data around to fundamental to your security posture, right? We've talked about zero trust and how zero trust really needs to focus on reducing blast radius and how microsegmentation is important for that. But we've also talked about the complexity, historical complexity of microsegmentation. So in the last, let's say 3 years, it could be longer, it doesn't actually matter. The focus hasn't really been on microsegmentation as much as it's been on automating the management and maintenance of microsegmentation.
Correct.
Right. The reality is microsegmentation is the same it's been for 10 years. It's the management and orchestration layer that has so substantially changed
Yes.
so that you're not managing 100,000 individual policies.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What does that change look like from kind of an operator standpoint?
Sure.
So that organizations no longer have to be overwhelmed when they hear the word microsegmentation.
So there are, very good question actually, Howard. There are two foundational elements of this particular question. One is that when you enter into an environment, let's say it's a mid-size environment, 5,000-10,000 server environment, where do you start with? And how do you basically game plan your segmentation? So obviously, you'll start with visibility, observability. You start with, okay, what's the pattern looking like? So either through the agent-based or non-agent-based technologies, then you will start understanding the traffic behavior. That traffic pattern leads to understanding that which ones are communicating on a regular basis and which ones are not. So this is where a quality solution, an autonomous solution, or an automated solution helps. It starts bubbling out that information to you and saying, I'm recommending these because these are management ports. I exactly know this is run by Windows Defender, CrowdStrike, and certain things. You need to give them access to perform certain things. Don't worry about it. You don't have to create policies. It's pre-created for you. You just have to say click, 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 and you are essentially 70-80% of your traffic is completely, that entire noise reduction happens. That's the automation that is being built in the last few years.
Sure.
So that 70-80%.
Let me interrupt for a sec, because it's more than noise reduction at that point, right? Because it's also, hey, we recognize this traffic from this port or to this port
Yes.
is CrowdStrike.
Yes.
We don't just reduce the traffic, but we also say the only valid place this can come from is CrowdStrike.
Is CrowdStrike.
Right?
Exactly.
And so immediately I've started to secure just by recognizing patterns and saying, I know what this traffic is, I know what this traffic does, and I know where the valid source and destination of this traffic is, and therefore I can immediately create a policy that says the only places that can communicate is from this valid to this valid, and we're done.
Exactly. In the last 2-3 years, that's the amount of automation that's been built, that significant reduction. Like, for example, our customers, we go and we say them in 2 weeks, that entire graph chat, the risk reduction would be reduced by 70% because we understand that traffic. That's a big deal for most of the CIOs and CISOs, because they say, we never had this amount of visibility and understanding and control. Then comes the templatization of applying policies for that application, AD, databases, application servers, so on and so forth. But that's one part of it where enormous amount of, and LLMs and Gen AI will bring in more and more intelligence on it, because now we have attributes and we'll be able to do a whole lot of things, much, much more, which is not only towards applying policies, and I'll cover that on the second phase, which is the segmentation, which was a network segmentation in the last 20-25 years, where you talked about VLANs and vSegment, those moved to the software defined segmentation. And this is what we have been talking for the last 15-20 minutes, right? But now it's moving towards the breach ready segmentation. So let's talk about breach readiness plan. What does it mean? It essentially means that you have things that patterns that you recognize, you want to apply policies, which is the protective part of it, proactive part of the segmentation. But it's also very important to provide a platform of what happens if and when breach happens. So today, platforms, micro-segmentation platforms like ours, we now give you tools to really act upon during the breach. Never before this has been covered. Because today, if you just go to any environment and the breach has happened, for almost like weeks, they are just looking at, where is the patient zero? What do we do now? There's no kind of a playbook that this is how you need to act if and when a breach happens. So quarantining plan, making sure your critical assets are always in control and isolated. Your business disruption is zero. Absolutely no business disruption should happen. And if and when there is kind of an attack, you kind of fence it and say, this is where it is. I am not actually allowing it to propagate to any other environments. So that's kind of a during the attack. And then there is post-attack scenario, which is predominantly focused on 3-4 areas. One is identifying patient zero. Second is material impact analysis, very critical. Then reporting it to the SEC guidelines and making sure whatever corrective actions you are taking to make sure it does not happen again. This micro-segmentation is applying only policies, building some level of intelligence. That's a thing of the past. Now, the breach-ready segmentation platform enables you to think about before it happens, let me take proactive actions. If and when it happens during, it's a matter of when, not if. So at that point in time, what governance controls do you have? How do I completely fence it and control it? How do I make sure that my business critical applications are running? And how do I make sure that this particular incident does not become a crisis? If and when it happens, how do I make sure that material impact analysis is done, reporting happens within the 48 hours to SEC, and how do I actually report it? All these elements are part of that entire breach-ready segmentation platform. So I hope I answered your question in terms of building an autonomous micro-segmentation and taking customers into the journey from before, during, and after the breach.
So as a final kind of thought here, right, and you hinted at it a little bit, we really want people to understand the advice is not, let's swallow the elephant whole, right? The advice is, let's eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? Let's use modern tools to solve modern problems at the rate that our organization can handle the operation, right? And so if that is just get the proper tools in place and really reduce the authorized traffic to those things we understand today and really focus on those things, it's an iterative improvement platform. It is not a once and done. And it is not you should never feel like you have to eat the elephant all at once.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And take steps one by one. Don't think about complete problem because it can overwhelm you. And observability, visibility, very important. The automation that is built into the solution that will give you 80% reduction. Lots of customers very happy with it. But don't think segmentation only. Think about breach readiness. Because if and when it happens and you don't have a playbook, it becomes a very difficult to run that entire operation at that point in time. It's extremely important to think about that if and when it happens, am I ready? Do I have tools for it? And let's say when it happens, then you are completely equipped to handle during the attack and post breach scenario also. So that you are right on top of it. You have to report to the board, you have to report to your CEO, you have to report to SEC. You have everything in place to make sure that you're reporting and giving them complete visibility as to where we are in the journey.
Sounds perfect. Well, with that, I want to thank you, Raj, for coming on our DDT podcast. Please like, subscribe, comment. Let us know if you'd like to hear a topic. And Raj, I hope to talk to you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Howard. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you.